We are live.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome back to Senate Judiciary. We have a kind of a unique day today. We're going to take up some property tax bills, which is a little outside our wheelhouse, but I'm sure that the Marine Corps up here can handle the duties. As I mentioned, Senator Cooper is off and about. So I'm not going to take roll, Pierre. You can, there's only 5 of us. So let's get underway with Senate File 63. Hopefully Senator Cooper can join us mid-stride. He's presenting a bill elsewhere, Senator Nethercott, so just so you know, he'll be back. And Senator Case is chairing his own committee right now. So Representative Crago, it's good to have you here. Senator Nethercott, take it away.
Good afternoon, Chairman Landon. Wonderful to be with the Senate Judiciary Committee, no doubt my favorite committee. Good senators, you have in front of you Senate File 63, Property Tax Exemption, Residential Structures 2. The reason why it's designated 2 is because the good representative to my right, Representative Crago, is the sponsor of House Bill 45, which is a mirror version of the bill. And the reason why there are mirror versions of this bill is to ensure that we provide effective relief to the people of Wyoming concerning increased property taxes. We know that's a serious concern. And so want to make sure the bill gets heard in both houses and that we have a mechanism to ensure that the people have some relief. So how this bill differs from some of the other tax relief bills that you may have heard of is that it is a tax cap structured as an exemption. Under this bill, the maximum amount taxes can increase in any year is 5%. So fundamentally, the maximum amount taxes can increase in any year is 5%. So no more double-digit increases for those counties that have seen that or experienced that. Furthermore, we don't have to amend the Constitution to provide this immediate relief. Many of the other tools being presented to the legislature require a constitutional amendment. And I mentioned this on introduction, which I think should not be ignored, the significance of the logistical challenges when we're changing our entire state property structure. That requires real challenges on the ground for our assessors who are responsible for making these changes to their systems right in place. And so this bill, if passed, already dovetails nicely with their software and their systems. So this relief can go into effect immediately. And so really important distinction here as well. That seems like an insignificant issue, but really, I think when it comes to the timing of providing property tax relief, that's an important function. The bill can go into effect actually in 24, as I indicated. It does not require any homeowner to apply for the exemption. It's just automatic. So also different than our current property tax refund program, which requires that application. It applies to all single-family residences in Wyoming, not just owner-occupied, so an important distinction there to consider. Happy to stand for questions before we walk through the bill. We do have an amendment that was passed on the House side, and I have that prepared for you today and can provide that to the Judiciary Secretary and to you individually. If we want to look at that as we walk through the bill, that'd probably be prudent if we could, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you for that, Senator. I'd like to clear something up. It's amazing how some various forms of bills get on these lists, and we end up receiving cookie cutters by the thousands, and people get a little upset about things that I don't think are really there. This, let me just say up front, as we're handing this out, the purpose all along for getting these bills to this committee is our intention is to give them a good look here and to get them up to the Wyoming Senate. That's what's going to happen here. Any claim that any one of these bills is being favored over anything else just simply is not the case. We want to give a fair hearing to every one of these bills And so with that cleared up, I would ask Senator if I have misrepresented anything by saying that.
No, Mr. Chairman, that is my understanding as well, that there's a lot of good ideas for the people of Wyoming that are currently on the table, or currently bill drafts being considered by this committee and the legislature. And so I think one of the challenges for us as a legislature is being able to compare and contrast and understand what works best for the people of Wyoming and understanding the fiscal impacts to our cities, counties, and towns. So a lot for us to understand and requires a thoughtful balancing of that compare and contrast analysis. So I don't think we're at any position to understand which is the better bill at this point until we are able to hear in detail about all of them.
That's exactly right. So committee, let's launch into the bill. And Senator, maybe you'd like to track us through the amendment, because we'd like to be ready with that when the time comes.
And if I can, Mr. Chairman, give significant credit here to Representative Crago, who did the vast majority of the heavy lifting in this bill. And so he deserves all the credit for the work done in it as well as in this amendment. And so any technical corrections or questions, I will defer to him immediately.
Absolutely. And please weigh in at any points in time. Please continue.
So as we start on page 1, we are amending kind of the caption here, and you can see that. So if you have your amendment sheet with you, kind of hold those side by side. I think it's important to understand, because this amendment here is a couple of pages, so it's pretty robust, and they start on page 1. And so if you see there, looking at the amendment first, page 1 above line 1, so we are amending that first paragraph starting with an unact on line 1, that after structures, we are inserting and land. So important to recognize that. So an act relating to taxation, establishing a property tax exemption for single-family residential structures based on the prior year's assessed value. Requiring information related to the tax exemption to be included on the tax assessment schedule, providing rulemaking authority, specifying applicability, and providing for an effective date. So here, when we see here on the amendment, we are inserting above page 1 above line 1 what I indicated there, and land. Page 1 line 3, after value, we have inserted establishing a property tax exemption for land associated with a single-family residential structure based on the prior year assessed value. So you can see how those first 2 lines of the amendment connect to each other and provide that explanation. Questions about that piece? I think it'll be easier just to do this bite by bite.
Okay, Senator Schuler, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my biggest question is why the addition of the land, and would this land include, I mean, I certainly wouldn't include agricultural land, but how much are we talking about? If someone had 5 acres or 10 acres and the house just happened to be in the smack dab in the middle of it, I mean, could you just talk about that for just a minute?
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler. So originally, this bill did not have land included in it, and that was for a reason. We were just trying to keep this very simple. What can we administer in 2024? And in talking to our good director from the Department of Revenue, as well as our local county assessors, if we include land, this can't really be administered in 2024. So what this amendment does, I'll just give you a big picture. It includes land starting in 2025. And that will give our assessors and the department some time to figure out what those exemptions look like for the land. And there's a definition what land is included, and that would be on page 3 of the amendment at the very top. And essentially, it's improved land associated with a single-family residential structure, and then it goes on to describe what that means. We talked about putting a size limitation on that, and in consultation with the director as well as the assessors, there's not a good size. There's not a good number that fits all. They already do this, for example, on homesteads on agricultural property. They already have a way to kind of figure out what that looks like and how to determine that. And so we didn't think we were going to make matters worse by trying to define a size. So we did not, and we just used the language associated with. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Representative. Please continue, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So going on to page 2 of the bill. This is the exemption, right? This is the property tax effect, this page. So the following property is exempt from property taxation: a portion of a single-family residential structure. And the following shall apply to that single-family residential structure. So the amount of the exemption shall be any assessed value of the single-family structure that is in excess of the prior year's assessed value, plus 5%. Questions about that?
We're good, committee? Okay,
And looking at the amendment on page 1, line 2, I'm sorry, on page 1, on the amendment is page 1, we're amending page 2, and that's line 18 on the amendment. We put in after value, we insert less any exemption authorized under this paragraph in the prior year. Kind of track that
Okay,
in.
are
And
we good,
Representative
committee?
Crago, want to
Okay.
provide additional explanation?
okay, Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All is helpful.
Absolutely. So the purpose of that language was just to clarify that the amount of the exemption doesn't, it's 5% of what it was last year. And I'll put it in numbers to make it simple. So if your house is worth 100,000 last year, the value goes up to 150,000. Your house will only be taxed at 105,000 because you have that exemption of 45. And so what this language clears up is that we're using the 105 as the starting point for next year's assessment. And that was some language that the good director came up with just to make it clear. It was always our intent that that was going to be what the bill did, but we had lots of questions and suggestions, and she came up with the best language, to be honest. And so credit goes to her. And this is just clarifying language to make sure that the exemption is based on the top number from the previous year.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Furphy.
yeah. I need to understand that a little further.
Can you pull your microphone real close there, Senator? I want to make sure everybody can hear
Okay,
everyone.
thank you.
Yeah,
I just want to clarify this. Okay, so in the previous year, not of course when this is implemented, but let's say in the future, in a previous year, you got a 5% exception from the increase in the value of the land and structure. So then the following year, help me follow what you're saying. So the next year, the value goes up by the assessed valuation, and you get another 5% exemption, correct?
so Representative, let's just operate with $100,000 piece of property and go from there. Would you do that for us?
I will follow
Thank you.
through, and I should have done this the first time. I apologize.
Okay,
Mr.
what's going to
Chairman.
happen this year and what's going to happen next year?
Absolutely, Senator Furphy. So we start with 100,000 last year, because we have to start with last year's value. Your property this year is now assessed, it's worth $150,000. You will only be taxed at 105 because it can only go up 5. Go forward another year. It goes up, your value goes up to 200,000. You can only take the 5% and add it to the 105, which puts you at 110,250. And so that will be the starting point for the following year. And so on and so on. And so it's based on the previous year minus the exemption. That's what the purpose of that language was, just to make clear.
Senator Furphy, does that help?
Yeah.
So, and quite obviously, if the assessment doesn't go up more than 5%, what happens then, Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, your assessment can go down. I mean, your taxes may go down without this exemption actually kicking in, because the exemption only kicks in if your property goes up by more than 5%, which is the problem we're trying to attack in many of the places around Wyoming, most of them actually.
Right.
But if for some reason the housing market goes down, your taxes will go down the same. There's no automatic increase. If it's under 5%, this exemption does not kick in, and whatever happens to your taxes in that particular realm is what happens to your taxes.
So, welcome to Senator Case. Senate File 63, and Senator Nethercott is walking us through. We're on page 2, Senator, and have been provided an amendment. Pierre, do we have one in front of Senator Case?
In the packet?
Okay, there should be a proposed amendment for, okay, says HB 45, that's the mirror bill on the other side. This one, we're tracking in on page 2 as we speak. So go ahead, Senator Nethercott, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at this point, we are on page 2 of the bill, line 17. And for Senator Case's benefit and the public following along, the amendments that we've discussed really are technical in nature and to provide clarifying language and are not substantive, in my view. They're just clarifying. So now that we have an understanding of how that last year's assessment is applied for the application of that 5% cap, I feel like we've got that managed. We'll move on to when that doesn't apply and what those exemptions from the exemption may be. So when it's not applicable, and that's found on page 2, line 21. The increase in value is attributable to structural changes to the single-family residence, including new construction or additions to an existing structure. So if you scrape your house and build a new one, or if you do some significant construction with additions, then that exemption doesn't apply.
Like if I build my shop, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep dreaming, keep planning. So an important consideration there. Then we're now on page 3, line 4. If the owner acquired the property during the prior calendar year, they don't get to go back on the previous owner's exemption or assessed value. And then when we look at the amendment on line 22, we have some additional exceptions to the application of the exemption. And that first one there, and they're in numerical order, is a transfer of property between spouses. Number 2, any transfer of property pursuant to a court order, such as in a divorce or some type of judicial settlement. Number 3, a transfer of property to a trust, which would go to the benefit of the current owner or the prior owner. If you own your home and create a trust and you transfer your own home into the trust, that would not make the exemption inapplicable. 4, a transfer of property to a corporation, partnership, or LLC, if the prior owner of the property is a shareholder or owner of the corporation. So a very similar concept to the trust piece. Number 5 is any other transfer of property that the department determines, the department being the Department of Revenue, determines by rule should not be an acquisition of property due to the relationship of the parties. Any questions about that?
Go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would that be like a divorce or something like that? I'm just looking at a scenario. What would that include on 5?
Senator, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think it would be divorce, since that is already expressly identified as one of those bases that you would not lose the exemption or the assessed value. So interested in hearing the conversations that Representative Crago may have had with the department in order to kind of put this catch-all language in there.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So actually, that's not a conversation I had with the department per se. That was with our good lawyers on our staff in the LSO, and that was some language they had pulled from some other places within the green books. And so some of that's just some form language that we have used in other places. And really what it's doing, it's giving our good department a little bit of flexibility. If there's essentially, if there's something we haven't thought of in the first 4, we're giving them a little bit of flexibility to say, yeah, we should probably do this or that. And that's what we were trying to do, is make that as broad as possible because we may not have all of the situations thought of right here, right today.
Good. Okay, please continue, Senator.
All right, good senators. We're going back up on page 3, line 7. We authorize the department to make rules. And so that really does connect into that paragraph 5 we just discussed on the amendment. Perhaps they want to make more specific rules about what maybe some of those relationships may be that we're not contemplating here as recommended by our LSO staff. Here's the definition of single-family residential structure. It means a structure intended for human habitation, including a house, modular home, mobile home, townhouse, or condominium, that is a privately owned single-family dwelling unit.
Go ahead, Senator Murphy.
I was looking at that definition. I wonder how we deal with VRBOs, the vacation rentals that people use as their primary residence for part of the year and then lease it out for the other part of the year. Have you considered that at all?
Representative, do you want to tackle that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy. So they would qualify, those homes would qualify under this exemption. And again, this goes back to our goal of trying to get the exemption in place in 2024. If we have any sort of application process where you have to certify that you live in the house a certain number of days or that you use it for a certain purpose, we can't do the exemption through the computer system. Right now, we're working with, hoping that the department can work with the local assessors and get it done through the system without an application process, because there's just no way we could do that application process. And to be honest with you, is I've learned a lot about this over the course of the last few months. It's going to be difficult even for them to do the land part when we get to that. There's just going to be some issues with that, and which is why we're pushing that off. But for example, in this county right here, there's 20-some thousand homes. And if you have to do an application on every single one of them, it gets very difficult, very time consuming. And to be honest, most of them don't. Most of our assessor's office would not have the staff to even do that. So it's something we have to think about in all of these tax bills as we're going forward. So that's why this one intentionally provides the exemption for all residential dwellings, and so that it can be done through the system alone.
Please continue, Senator. Let's march on through this and we'll get to comments on the bill and keep moving.
All right, we shall march forward, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So if you look at page 2 of the amendment, we've already walked through that. Looks like LSO provided that much more succinctly than I did in the explanation, but that is it and how it works. So going back onto page 3 of the bill, we are on line 16, imposition. So the basis of the tax, the following shall apply. Every assessment schedule sent to a taxpayer shall contain the property's estimated fair market value for the current and previous year, or productive value in the case of agricultural property. The schedule shall also contain the assessment ratio as provided by paragraph B, Romanet 3 of this section for the taxable property. The amount of taxes assessed on the taxable property from the previous year, an estimate of the taxes which will be due and payable for the current year, based on the previous year's mill levies, and if the property is a single-family residential structure, an estimate of the taxes that will be avoided if the property is eligible for the exemption under this statute. Just a reminder there about the meaning of underlined language. All right.
Anything, committee? Okay, please proceed.
So now we're on page 4. And on the amendment, page 3, line 13, we have an additional addition here. So on page 4, after line 14, we are inserting the language there you see on the amendment regarding compliance and collection procedures. And it provides that the following provisions shall apply to the payment of taxes, distraint of property, and deferral. And again, I'm just going to focus on that new language there, and this language is currently in statute. So we're looking at the underlined language is found on line 30. And if the property is a single-family residential structure, an estimate of the taxes that will be avoided if the property is eligible for the exemptions under the statute. And so what we're doing is we're just putting this concept into the current framework for how we do assessed valuations and for compliance and collection procedures. And so there's nothing new about the process as applied to this application of this property tax reduction. It just kind of dovetails again into how our statutes currently work. So important to recognize, page 4, line 14, going back to the bill draft. And page 3, line 39 of this amendment, which you kind of coordinate there. The exemption provided by this, as created in this act, shall first apply to the tax year beginning January 1, 2025.
And I think, committee, that's over on line 14, page 4, is where that tracks in,
Correct.
meaning that the current year, as we sit right now, right? So Representative, do you want to please expound a little bit on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's actually 2 effective dates. There's an effective date for the house or the home part of the exemption, which is in the first part, which is in the original bill, not in the amendment. That is effective as of January 1st, 2024, this year. And so that would show up on this year's assessment notices, which is why it's really important if we end up passing this bill, we need to do it as soon as possible so that we give our assessors and the department time to administer this. Because many of them are obviously working on their assessments right now. Those have to go out in April, so that if this is going to go into effect, they need as much time as possible. The second part of that, which is in the amendment, talks about the land portion only of the exemption, and that would not go into effect for a whole another year, so that we would have time to get it in place and give our good public officials the opportunity to fix that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Thanks for
if
that
I-
clarification. Appreciate it. Go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, so page 4, line 14 and 15, that is not amended. That remains in the bill. And so that's what the representative was referring to, that it goes into effect January 1, 2024. And then the language is found on page 3, line 39 of the amendment. That's that 2025 language, I think, for that land portion.
Thanks for that clarification, both of you. And so please proceed, Senator. We're coming to the end of we're actually at the end of the amendment.
Hooray, we are at the end of the amendment, and as Representative Crago indicated, we need to make sure if this bill passes, it's able to go into effect as immediately as possible. So the language there in section 3 on page 4 does exactly that, to ensure that all of the hardworking people on the ground who would be responsible for putting this bill into action have the time to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. Committee, any questions for the sponsors of this bill? Before we ask them to fade into the background a little bit, but go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add one thing. The one on the page 3 of the amendment there, on lines 15 through 33, we had a request from our good county treasurers. And so what that part does is, so the original bill draft required the exemption amount, exactly how much the taxpayers are going to be saving, to be put on the notice of assessment, which goes out. This would actually have it show up on your tax bill too. And that's for their ease. They get a lot of calls from realtors all the time saying, hey, what are the taxes on this? They would be able to report that, showing what the taxes are with and without the exemption, so that they could report that when they get those calls at the county treasurer's office. And that was a request for them, and it made sense, so we stuck it in there. So that's what that part of the amendment does.
To both of you, I would commend you for the continuing work. I know that I'm looking at a couple of our other sponsors of other bills, and most of these have continuing work during this session while we're trying to get other bills passed. Senators and representatives are working on every one of these to try to get them as sparkled up as we can. So I commend you on that. To both of you, I'm going to go to some comment on this bill. so that we can begin to answer any questions or certainly hear from, let's go with the department first, if we could. And then we'll go to any other agency folks and then on to anyone who wants to weigh in on any of these bills. We're gonna work them as hard and fast as we can. We are scheduled tonight as well, so we will take up whatever we don't get to, folks. We'll have to take them up upon adjournment, but welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue, and I believe that the sponsor and Representative Crago have really covered this. There was a great deal of discussion on the House Bill 45, and some excellent points were made, and I feel that the amendment as presented addresses those. Bottom line, we can administer this exemption within the computer-assisted mass appraisal system without any programming costs. The key to rolling this out quickly, as stated, is the fact that there's no application process. We did do some analysis of that, and we'll speak to that as we consider other bills. But it really does streamline this process. Related to rulemaking, we reached out to assessors, and we'll obviously have to do emergency rules on this since it's applicable for the 2024 tax year. But we've already started those discussions. We don't believe that there's a significant amount of rulemaking that will have to be addressed, mainly because of the amendments that we saw that you've got to consider today on this bill. So with that, I truly am here to answer any administrative questions related to the Department of Revenue. As you know, we are responsible for providing the computer-assisted mass appraisal system to all county assessors, and all 23 county assessors use that system to do all of their statutory duties. So that's our role. But the piece of this related to administration really does fall on county assessors in each of the counties to get those notices of value, i.e. assessment schedules, ready to go in a short amount of time. So with that, I'd answer any questions.
So the Director, thank you. The fiscal notes kind of are a little bit of a wag, I'm certain, but are you going to be able on each of these property tax bills to give us that wag?
Mr. Chairman, we basically have said indeterminable.
Yeah.
That is our official. There is no way for us to project into the future. The Craig report is what we rely upon when we look at future years. Now, the Craig report for the most recent report that we did in January showed an increase of approximately 5% for the all other property category. And in that Craig report, that includes everything excluding minerals. So it's looking at industrial, commercial, agricultural, residential. So the Craig estimates an increase from 23 to 24 of about 5%. This particular legislation puts a cap on the residential structure. So the way this is written, we'll calculate a 5%, take last year's value, multiply it by 1.05 to get an amount, and then any value that is in excess of that will be considered exempt. We'll do that on the single-family residential structure. We'll also then do that same calculation on the associated land in 2025 when that kicks in. So we really do have the mechanics worked out within the computer system, mass appraisal system. And so with that, we feel we could push it out in 24.
Thank you, Brenda. So go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my concern from the beginning here with the addition of the land kind of gives me concern. Is 2025 really going to give you enough time for your folks, both in the counties and yourself with the revenue folks to be able to do that? It just seems like it's a sticky wicket to me.
just to tag on to that question, with a session in between, would you be able to know by the end of the year if we're going to be able to lift that part of the bill?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Schuler, yes, we just need a few months to look at the data, see where we're at. Our initial numbers, a significant number of properties are going to be that, the homes that are in town are small, less than an acre. Those are the types of things where this really, we need to look at are those rural properties in Wyoming. Most rural properties include agricultural land. This bill specifically is residential associated land. And so we feel that we've got a good handle on that, but we just want to look at that data and ensure that the legislative intent is what happens and there are no unintended consequences. And to your question, Chairman Landon, definitely, I absolutely believe values have to be established by the county assessor no later than June 1st and reported to the State Board of Equalization. As soon as that occurs, we can do a lot of analysis to see what happened with those land values. The other part about an exemption, this is not backfilled. This is an exemption that will reduce the taxable value for all taxing entities where this exemption is applicable. We'll be able to provide the legislature with exactly how much taxable value was exempted in each of the counties, in each of the towns. We have that reporting ability in the computer system, mass appraisal system. So if you want to regroup, you'll have a lot of information to do so.
Yeah. Anything else for the director? Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you,
Brenda.
Mr.
Appreciate you being here. Let's go to any other agency folks that I'm looking out across. Yeah. I think you might be it. That's the deal right there. So thanks for being here. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Marty Hardsog. I'm chairman of the Board of Equalization, and Jane Mockler, my co-board member, is watching with great interest. I'm not speaking.
Former senator, and so she's on Zoom today?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We
Well, that's
we
good.
hang on every word.
I can't wait to see her. Former Du Bois girl, so go ahead.
I'm going to present some comments similar to what I presented before the House Revenue Committee. And this will apply really to all of these bills that are caps. And as was basically stated up front, these work through an exemption, which is kind of a workaround because the Constitution requires that market value be used to tax and that it's fair market value. So what these bills do are use an exemption to work around that and then to apply that exemption to anything basically above 105% of the previous year's market value. Just want to caution everybody here again, and I know there's a lot of momentum to get relief, but the Constitution has a couple of provisions that are going to very quickly come into play with regard to all of these cap bills when they start to work. Section 11 of Article 15, if you look down, C and D, it says that taxation, not value, but taxation shall be uniform and equal. Okay, that's very important. And basically, my comments are going to point out that very quickly, especially in a market that's moving quickly, you're going to have a lot of inequality and non-uniformity. And I'll explain why. If let's just illustrate, let's say you three owned houses very similar houses in a subsection of Laramie County, but you purchased them at different times. Chairman Landon, let's say you had your property when this went into effect. Senator Schuler, let's say you purchased your property 5 years after this went into effect. And Senator Furphy, let's say you purchased your property 10 years after this went into effect. And let's assume, as has been happening over the last 3 or 4 years, Values have been going up 15, 20% a year. Now, going back to the beginning, Chairman Landon, you'd be sitting pretty good. You would have been locked
I
in.
like where I'm sitting, yeah.
Your value on which your taxes are applied would be basically 1.05% of the previous year's taxable value. So even though your market value might be, let's say you're living in a house at $100,000, or that the market value is, let's say it's 200,000, but it might be that you're paying taxes based on a value or with the exemption applied of 120. Okay, and you moved in 5 years after the chairman, and so you didn't get the full benefit of all of those years in that climbing market. The same house with the same market value, but maybe you're paying taxes on 160. And because you're the late comer to the neighborhood, same house, same basic market value, but you're going to get the least exemption because yours is going to be applied much later in that upswing of market value. Now, the problem with this is anytime you have an inequality in the way the law applies, we start talking about things like equal protection. In equal protection, you can, in round terms, you can say that there are winners and losers. A class is going to be treated differently, but there's always a good reason under equal protection analysis. You know, the poor are given a tax break or are given benefits because they can't afford. And so the equal protection laws allow that society, the government can say, you're not going to pay the same tax burden as folks that can afford it. That's common. Same is true of property uses with charitable reasons. Nonprofits, charitable organizations, they don't pay property taxes if they're using their property to benefit the public. Very common. When we look at the exemptions that are applied across the board here, this is unusual as well, to that everybody in the estate gets potentially is benefits from an exemption. It's not need-based. It's strictly based on when you purchased. So if we plotted everybody's property value, or I shouldn't say property value, but tax liability on a chart, and let's say maybe 5% of all that properties in an area turn over every year, maybe 3 to 5%. Pretty soon, if you look at that line going across on how much people are paying, all things being equal, then you're going to start seeing spikes where the people who came lately in that up market are going to end up paying quite a bit more tax. And even what's interesting about this bill is they're required to put the tax savings right in your tax notice. So if I were, a person were to move to Wyoming and buy property and get their tax notice and then talk to their neighbor, and their neighbors lived there for 20 years, the person that just purchased their property is going to see zero or very little. Their neighbor with the same house, same market value, same everything, the mere fact that they lived there for 20 years is going to have quite a substantial savings right on their tax bill. So all I'm saying is you have a festering uniform taxation and equality of taxation problem here. That's it. Typically, as I explained, exemptions are applied on a very narrow, deliberate basis. And it's usually driven by some public policy where the use of the property justifies it, as with charitable purposes, or there's a veterans exemption, very common. Those are upheld all the time. They're being rewarded for the sacrifices they made. But here you've got an exemption that applies to every single person potentially. And the size of the exemption is going to be directly proportionate to how long you've lived there and how that market is moving. And unfortunately, it wouldn't be difficult to prove that one taxpayer is being treated very disproportionately or disparately when everything else could be equal, right? I'll leave it at that. I think that it's important that you know what's potentially going to happen here. I understand the intent to give people tax relief, but you're going to have, and even within the same county, this could be true, certainly across the state, where property values may be really moving in Teton County or Park, but in Weston or Niobrara, property values are moving very little. Well, the folks in these other counties are going to enjoy tremendous exemptions. And the folks living in counties where the market's fairly serene may get none. And so there you go. That's something that you want to keep in mind. I think that is going to be a problem one way or the other if these in fact become law.
Question
Answer
to
any
Director
questions.
Hartzog. Well stated. Appreciate that caution. Having served on corporations for a while, that word exempt kind of jumps out there, doesn't it? Appreciate it, though. Thank you, Director.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Thanks
members
for
of the
being
committee.
here this afternoon. Appreciate it. We want to keep going and hopefully at least finish this bill. It looks as though we're not going to make it to 4 and 5, and I'm looking back at the Vice President. But we're going to keep chugging and go as hard and fast as we can. We'll carry it into the evening. Anyone want to testify on this bill? Please come forward. Okay, let's get let's get our county folks up here. Thank you very much for joining in. We know you, but please, for the record, remind us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dixie Huxtable. I am the Converse County Assessor, and I am serving today as the Legislative Chairman for the Assessors Association. And thank you for allowing us to have a couple of comments. We don't really have a lot on this bill. As the Director stated, we are able to administer it for 2024. When it was initially drafted, we had considerable questions and concerns. We feel like we've worked through most of those and feel like with the help of the guidelines from the department and with the assistance from the software people, the CAMA providers, that we'll be able to administer the structure part of it for 2024. In regards to a comment that was made, structural changes, so that's in the bill. The structural changes that we're talking about is specific to the residential structure. So a comment, I believe, was made about building a new shop or garage. That is not a residential structure, so that is not eligible for the exemption. So I want to be sure that everybody's clear on that. If you build an addition to your house, that is what we're talking about, that would cause the exemption to be voided. But we're only talking about the value of that house, not the value of the outbuildings, so to speak, shops and sheds.
So, Ms. Huxtable, maybe I better attach it and put a loft in there or something. No, I'm just kidding. Please continue.
Mr. Chairman, certainly that is a question that's been asked about attached garages versus detached, because the attached garage is part of the structure of the house in our valuation methodology, whereas a detached garage is not. That's just the way it is. That's the definition. The other question or the comment that I guess I would make is couple of them, the land. The reason that we can't do it is there's a variety of ways legally and approved for us to value land, residential land. And we are talking parcels from several thousand square feet to thousands of acres, that we do have those size parcels that are residential. And we want to make sure that we have them listed correctly so that we're appropriately administering the exemption. If the intent is residential improved land, we want to make sure we have that correct in the system and have a way to track that. So we feel confident, as the Director said, that we could do that by 2025, but there are just some things to work out. I think it can be done with rules, but there's just some things that we're going to have to look at to get done. And the last thing is time is of the essence. We have assessors, most of us should be home working on our values right now, and those others that are home are doing that. And several of them are scheduled to send those notices out in March. So time is of the essence for us to get this done in the system, get it to our printers, everything has a timeline moving on for board hearings, appeals. It's just a whole tax calendar that's really critical that we stay online. And so we just ask that time be of the essence. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Huxtable? Mr. Reaman, take it away. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Senator.
I should maybe understand this process, but I don't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do you tie into the Department of Revenue to determine these values? Because the Department of Revenue has a detailed computer system to develop these values. How do you determine the values? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Ms.
Thank you,
Huxtable.
Mr. Chairman. Senator Furphy, thank you for the question, because that's a very valid question. The Department of Revenue, as Brenda stated, provides the software and the CAMA system that we all have to use, and it provides the cost tables. So we put the characteristics of a property into the system, and it comes up with a cost, a replacement cost, new, less depreciation. But we are charged to be at fair market value, and for most residential properties, we have sales. We go out and look at the sales that have occurred to give us an analysis of what is the house actually selling for on the market. And then we have market adjustments that are applied. Different counties, certainly, different areas within a county, different types of property within the county will have different market adjustments. So we're all starting with the same basic CAMA system to start with that replacement cost new based on the characteristics we collect. And then we're looking at our sales analysis to say, what does the market say it's valuing for? And this is where residential is different from some other properties that we don't have a lot of sales on, but we do for residential. And the same is true with land, except we kind of skipped that cost basis because land is what it's worth, what it sells for. We don't, that's how you value land. That's the highest and best way to value it, is based on market sales. So we put that market information into the CAMA system for land. For buildings, we put the characteristics in, start with a basis for a cost, depreciate it based on life, economic, functional use, and then apply a market adjustment.
Okay, now let's go to Mr. Reaman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Reaman here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I'm going to take just a little bit of time. I'll be as quick as I possibly can, but because you're not the typical revenue committee that I'm before, I think it's important to understand a few things about property taxes. And of course, I'm just going to represent the county portion of this equation. But before I do that, I wanted to just mention that we will begrudgingly perhaps support this legislation that comes after a lot of hard consideration amongst all of the various options that are out there. We come from a perspective of wanting to be less reliant on state revenue, not more reliant, and there is some concern that this could push us towards more reliance. Of course, we want to avoid building more structural gaps between our mineral counties and our hardship counties, and I'll get into a little bit of data around that. Of course, we want to avoid tax shifts from all of us towards our mineral industry as part of our, and so with that, I'd just offer a few comments. And the data that I'm going to provide to you comes from one of three sources. You heard from our county assessors, and they're always a great resource for me. Department of Revenue and our department, our State Board of Equalization are all great resources that I get this information from. So if you're looking at the big pie of property taxes, the vast majority of it, of course, goes to our schools. Roughly 73% of all property taxes in fiscal year 23 went to our schools. For my perspective, about 17.5% went to county government, an additional 7.8 to special districts, and the remaining 1.8 to municipalities. Of course, the schools are constitutionally protected, right? My guys aren't. So it's important that we're at this table having this conversation with you. If I emphasize nothing else in the course of my comments today, I want to just emphasize that no two counties are the same when it comes to property taxes. If I were to group the counties into three buckets, the first bucket being the 7 highest property tax generators, that would be $282 million of the county portion that's collected every year, or 73%. So in other words, 73% of all of our property taxes in the state of Wyoming go to 7 counties. The bottom 9 counties get just under 8% of that total. So it's important to understand, again, where it's going. If I'm talking about those 7 highest, 3 of those are recapture districts. Campbell County and Sublette County are recapture districts on minerals, right? They send a ton of money back here. I believe it's right around $120 million each per year to fund schools. There's one county up in the northwest part of the state, Teton County, is a recapture district on residential property. They send about $82 million a year to the state right now. It's important when we're talking about all these, we start putting caps, exemptions, and the like, you could throw that out of whack. It's entirely possible that you will reduce that taxable value in Teton County and thus have a reverberation. And maybe you don't worry about that too much because the state's going to backfill it, but just to throw that out there, it's a consideration. We have had other mineral counties. Campbell County just a few years ago dropped out of revenue recapture. They're back in, but it can happen. I mentioned those 9 lower tier counties. 6 of those are hardship counties. That means they can't generate $300,000 per mill. And I'll get a little bit more to that. What is some interesting and maybe some good data out of all of this right now is that both Crook and Bighorn counties have now moved out of hardship status in the last fiscal year. Just barely for Crook, it was just barely for Bighorn. They're about $303,000 per mill, and Bighorn about $328,000 per mill. Now in the state of Wyoming, all 21 of 23 counties assess the full 12 mills that they're allowed by the Constitution. The 2 that don't are Teton, which assesses 7.379 mills, and Campbell County, which is at 11.1 mills. Again, thinking about all those levers that you pull here, you could perhaps put a cap in place, and that's going to affect revenue for all of the counties, perhaps save one, and that's Teton, because they have that 6 mills or just under 6 mills that they could raise despite any of the levers that you pull here. So again, just a consideration to think about. If you're looking at the per mills, I said that we have 6 that are under 300,000. The lowest mill levy in the state, or at least in terms of their mill value, is Niobrara County at $164,000. Campbell County is the highest at $5.7 million. That means that it takes, 34.66 Niobrara County mills to equal 1 Campbell County mill. Quite a disparity between those 2, and that's actually grown over the last fiscal year. If I'm talking about these things and looking at the exact figures for how much each of those counties have seen as increases between 2018 and 23 in terms of revenue, I bet you'd be shocked to know that the county itself, and I'm not talking about the schools or the special districts or anybody else, but Niobrara County only takes in $43,000 more in residential property taxes than it did in 2018. That's not a whole lot, and I've shared with other bodies that Niobrara County, in the past couple of years, they've been saving up, and I'm really proud of the work that they've done. They now are offering health insurance to their employees for the first time ever. It's only to the employee, it's not to the family, but that's an effort that they've made, and part of that is made possible by this revenue. And so just again, have to think about what this looks like. Now, I will be very honest, there are 2 counties that have doubled the amount of residential property taxes that they take in. Teton County at that low mill levy has doubled. Lincoln County has doubled the amount of revenue that they're taking in.
So keep chugging along
yeah.
here, Mr. Reman. We are really running out of time in a hurry. So
Mr. Chairman, that's where I was going to end, and
Okay.
providing you that data. Again, we support this. I wanted to be able to provide this picture because it applies to the other bills that you're going to consider as well. The levers you pull are important. This is one we're willing to support, and hope that you will continue to move it along and help us get across the finish line with it.
thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate it. Any questions for the county commissioners? Very valuable, really spot on. So I'm going to entertain a little bit more testimony. Let's make it quick and to the point, if you would. We've got to get back upstairs here in about 12, 13 minutes. So, and we're going to have to pick things up upon adjournment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau, sitting in support of this bill. I appreciate the help that we'll give the residences of Wyoming. And I do really appreciate the amendments that are being contemplated. I think it's important to get that in there because of so many of my members and other people. For example, my house is in a trust. I want to make dang sure this applies to that. Trying to be succinct as possible, Mr. Chairman. I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have.
Appreciate that, Brett. Any questions for the Farm Bureau? Appreciate you being here. Thank you. Let's go to Mr. Woody.
Chairman Landon, how you doing? Bill Winnie, Sublette County. You all have a plethora of bills on various facets of the property tax, and I don't envy you sorting your way through those. My request of you is very simple. Keep your eye on the ball. The issue is home and hearth for people that are on fixed incomes. If you look back a little bit, our Constitution was structured when gold was $20 an ounce and inflation wasn't very much. They did have periodic economic bubbles, but pretty stable. And that was for 45 years. Then gold was 35 bucks an ounce, and that was for 36 years. And then in 1971, inflation became the coin of the realm. People on fixed incomes are squeaking. My first mortgage that I took out in 1979 was a 12% mortgage. We're not near that these days, but you get the idea. The taxes are rising under these people on fixed incomes, and COLA, if they have it, doesn't always help. If they're Social Security reliant, they don't get the full COLA. A little bit of it is taken out for Medicare, so they don't see that. Your state employees do not get cost of living allowances or adjustments. And I understand the math, I know why that is, but nevertheless, that captures them with these rising taxes. So what's that mean? I retired from active duty in 2002 because my Navy check is COLA adjusted. At the federal level, my income from the Navy pension has doubled in 20 years. Your people on fixed incomes are squeaking with that kind of thing. So I've heard a discussion as to why there's no COLA. I got it. But that leads me to my final point, which is very simple. You have this octopus called inflation. You've either got to give your state employees a cost of living adjustment, and like I said, I understand the issue there, or you need to do something as these taxes rise up underneath them. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Appreciate it, Bill. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, gentlemen. So I would like to go through every piece of testimony that folks would like to give. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for that. How many really would like to testify on this bill as we contemplate moving it forward to this evening? Okay, I'm gonna close testimony then. Committee, we may just have time to consider this bill. So what's the pleasure of the committee?
The bill.
Moved by Schuler, yep. Moved by Senator Furphy, too. Amendments. Does somebody have an inclination to move an amendment? Senator Schuler.
Mr. Chairman, I feel very comfortable with the amendments that Senator Nethercott and Representative Crago made. And thank you for the explanations. They're easy to track. So I don't see any others that I would offer.
Okay, we've got a motion on the amendment. We've been through it. Any further questions? All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. That amendment has passed. And you've got a copy of that here? Okay, we're back on this bill. Senate File 63. Any further thoughts, any questions, committee? Unfortunately, this is 1 out of 4 or 5. We've got a long ways to go, and we fully intend to get them out, just so folks know. Please take roll, Pierre, on Senate File 63.
Senator Case,
Excused,
Senator Cooper,
also excused.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator Schuler,
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Aye.
3 ayes, 2 excused.
Okay, Senate File 63, folks, will go to the full Senate. And I anticipate that several other property tax bills will do the same. I think there's a lot of sentiment that we get something done on this front. We have all these cautions. I'm looking back at Mr. DeCaria and all the schools out there. We've got counties out there. We've got lots of considerations, but we're going to continue to work it. Appreciate our taxpayers being here and lots of folks. Thank you, everyone. We will reconvene the Judiciary Committee upon adjournment. I wish I knew what time that would be. But we'll be here when we're allowed. How about that? Thank you very much for coming. We're adjourned.
Got one done.
Yeah, we did.
I was a little nervous when I saw those amendments.
Oh, geez, I know.
They did.